Hello, everyone, and welcome into today's Irish NFL show with me, Colum Cronin. And I am delighted to be joined by a good friend of the show at this point. You may have seen her on Up and Adams recently from Fox Sports. It is Carmen Vitali. Carmen, how are you doing?
I'm wonderful. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, delighted to always get to chat to you, and it's great to see you popping up here, there, and everywhere, and well earned. Remember the days, back when we were discussing the Buccaneers.
I
How nice are those uniforms that they
know.
were playing? Oh,
I was
so
actually I didn't know if I was really going to end up loving them. And then I unfortunately had to watch the game on television. I wasn't there at the game. We have a wonderful NFC South writer that was there instead, but they popped off the screen and I was like, that's it. I'm sold. I saw them on Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. I'm like, that's it. We're done. I love it.
yeah, so good. I suppose I asked JP Costa this a little bit. We discussed this a little bit. A lot of people talk about the Seahawks as being the NFL's most unusual team. There's the meme about why can't you ever play a normal game, but really, should that not be the Minnesota Vikings? I mean, the Seahawks have a Super Bowl. They had the Legion of Boom. Once again, it's another year where the Vikings, everything is bananas. I mean, the bounce of the ball doesn't go their way. Their EPA is much better this year, but the record isn't as good. Brian Flores has them blitzing like at a higher rate than anyone else has done on third down. Uh, they're the Vikings are the Vikings.
It's interesting to me because the Vikings are the Vikings, whether or not they're successful. So last season, won the division, a 13-4 record, yet 11 of those games were one-score games, and they were 11-0 one-score games. And things went wrong, things went right, it was still a weird season despite the fact that they were so successful. And now you get the other side of the coin in this season where things aren't going so well, and there just seems to be, I mean, I guess it's fitting that I'm on an Irish podcast. There's a tremendous amount of luck involved, both good and bad luck, and they're getting the bad luck part of every bounce, every penalty, I mean, even last week against the Chicago Bears, Kirk gets called for an intentional grounding penalty on third down that would have extended the drive. And CJ Ham was right there. I mean, he couldn't have been more than 2 yards from that football. And there's just so many little things that keep going wrong. And that was in a win, in fact, for the Vikings. So I think they're the weirdest team. I'm a little bit biased because I cover them week in and week out. They're one of my teams. But I have to imagine that no one has an explanation for if the Vikings are going to be good or not on any given week.
Yeah, it is any given season. Certainly, it just seems there's always intrigue in Minneapolis. I suppose, though, look, the talking point around the NFC North has to be the Lions. And when we look at it this weekend, right? This and this we're recording a couple of days early, but this will be going out at the weekend. I mean, to me, the Lions Ravens is the game of the weekend. And here, Detroit was for so long the factory of sadness. Well, we have a song over here you might be familiar with called House of Fun. That's what Ford Field feels like, the House of Fun now.
I've had the tremendous opportunity to now go to Ford Field this season, and the fans are all in, and it's so rewarding, and it's just so fun to see the Detroit Lions be able to play in front of their fans and have that true home field advantage and have a deafeningly loud stadium that rivals any of the indoor stadiums that I've been to. And it's just, I can't describe them in any other word but fun. You go in that locker room too. I remember even last season when the Lions were losing in the beginning of it, that first half, and it was still a weirdly fun locker room to be in because everybody had that belief even when they were losing. And I think that that's what's serving them well coming into the season where they did have expectations. I think everybody thought that they were going to win this division. I don't think that they thought the Lions were going to be the juggernaut that they turned out to be so far. But the Lions' belief in themselves has just been completely unwavering for the last couple of seasons under Dan Campbell. And that is exactly the reason why they are having as much success as they are, as much as it has to do with the wonderful play calling by Ben Johnson and the way that Aaron Glenn has turned the defense around. I think the most important part of this is the fact that the Lions wholeheartedly from top to bottom believe in themselves. And it's so fun for Detroit because Detroit deserves it.
Yeah, no, long-suffering Lions fans in Detroit and on this side of the Atlantic, yeah, they do deserve it. Just on that, like they were favorites, a lot of talk about them, but for Ben Johnson, right? Because coordinators, sometimes you need to strike when the iron is hot, right? Like the Giants, Kafka, right? A lot of talk for him in the offseason. He decides to go back to New York. Things aren't working out. Look, it's a long season. But for Ben Johnson, were there any qualms, do you think, when he decided, I'm going to go back, I want to see this out, we've got a really kind of special group? Were there any kind of questions anywhere in the back of his head going like, maybe I should have taken one of these jobs? Or did he know that this truly was, and given what Dan Campbell and the Lions were building, did he really think the opportunities are good now, they might be even better in a year's time?
I don't think that there was any question in his mind. And again, that goes back to last season, that even when they were losing, they knew they had something special. They were building something special, and that paid off in the back half of last season. And it's a momentum that they've continued into this one. So I think that especially when you're taking head coaching interviews, you're not taking head coaching interviews for teams that are good most of the time, almost all of the time. So I think Ben Johnson also saw, like, listen, I can struggle, and everybody wants that opportunity to turn a franchise around and be the guy to do it. And I think that Ben Johnson will eventually be the guy to do something like that. But why leave now? Why leave when the Lions now have all of this momentum and he truly believes in this team, because everyone in that building believes in this team, and see how far you guys can take it before then Ben Johnson ends up leaving? I don't think that he's going to last past this season in Detroit, because I think some team is just going to throw a Brinks truck at him and be like, hey, here's all the money that you could possibly want as a head coach. Come be our head coach. Come fix our quarterback. Come do something along those lines that Ben Johnson can do and is willing to do. He puts in just a tremendous amount of work. I've heard from coaches in that building. He is the first one in, the last one out. He's constantly just ideating different ways to attack defenses. Even in training camp, the defensive coaches would tell me that they would maybe figure him out by the end of a practice. And by the next day, Ben Johnson would have 5 different wrinkles that they had never seen before. So they had no idea what he was doing after all. That's the kind of guy that he is. So he fits so well with that staff. He fits so well with Dan Campbell. I couldn't be happier for him, and the things that he's been able to do in Detroit and the different ways that he's evolving offense as we know it.
Yeah, I mean, like you think to even the Falcons game where the direct snap to the RB, even with Jared Goff on
through Jared Goff's legs.
It was amazing. Just, I mean, so innovative. But it's on both sides of the ball, because defensively, they really struggled in the early part of last year. Then they kind of really put it together. But can you talk a little bit about Aiden Hutchinson? Because I think, obviously, look, the Browns are probably getting, understandably, the laurels at the moment. They have been fantastic, and Myles Garrett has been excellent. And Bryce Huff with the Jets has been fantastic. But quietly, Aiden Hutchinson could and maybe should be in the Defensive Player of the Year talk, right?
I'm so glad you said that, because that's this conversation that I've started having the last few weeks. And again, I know I'm biased. I cover 4 teams primarily in this league, in addition to it as a whole, but I'm exposed to Aiden Hutchinson every week. And from my eyes, he is absolutely in that conversation of the elite pass rushers, because he's doing it on that defensive line, at least on the edges, kind of on his own. I don't want that to come off as a slight to John Kaminsky or the guys on the other side, but he is getting pressure regardless if he's getting double or triple teamed sometimes from these offensive linemen on the other side of the line of scrimmage. And he's able to move from the outside to the interior. He's got just an arsenal of pass rush moves that he keeps bringing out. And then on top of that, dude's got hands. He's making one-handed interceptions, and he had never had an interception in his entire football career prior to getting into the NFL, which is wild. The fact that you can develop a skill like that and be so successful when you had absolutely no practice at it and then do it at the highest level. I mean, he's an alien. He's an absolute alien. And I need to see more talk, and I need to see him be in this conversation for Defensive Player of the Year, especially given the Lions' defensive turnaround and the fact that they are having so much success. So I don't know what's keeping people from having that conversation, but I'm trying to have it.
Yeah, like the style is different, but to me, in many ways, he reminds me a little bit of Von Miller, right? Because you see what he wears and you see the fun that he brings and how he is, and the fact that he continuously develops his game. I think that was one thing you notice with Von throughout his career is he's looked to do different things. We saw Von drop into coverage at times, make interceptions famously on Tom Brady, and not a bad comp to have for Aiden, but it'll be very interesting to see because, as you said, they have been the juggernaut. Now, the other side of that is the team who haven't been the juggernaut is the Bears. And I know you and Adam obviously have the podcast that you weekly covering the Bears, but this wasn't how it was supposed to go this year for the Bears.
You were supposed to see tangible improvement. I cautioned against any of the Justin Fields MVP talk and all this other stuff. I said success for the Chicago Bears in 2023 looks like incremental but tangible improvement. Whether or not that translates to wins, I don't know. But as long as you see this offense kind of start clicking, you see Justin Fields making his reads, throwing with anticipation, connecting with his receivers, being protected by his offensive line. If you see those things happening, I don't care if you win games. That's what's supposed to happen in a rebuild where you tore basically everything down. And so far, the same problems that existed last year are cropping up this year. And that's the most disheartening part, I think, for Bears fans and for the city of Chicago in general that has been absolutely desperate for a good quarterback and an offense. This is a city built on defense. It's the reason that I grew up so invested in defense and why I've studied defense much more than I have offense, just because of the fact I didn't have an offense to look at when I was growing up. So my favorite players were Lance Briggs and Brian Urlacher and stuff like that. And I think that is also another disheartening thing about the Chicago Bears is over the last couple of weeks, we've seen a little bit of improvement from the defense, but not enough. Matt Eberflus is a defensive head coach. That is his side of the ball. Not that I can excuse the offensive struggles because you got rid of any excuses that Justin Fields had to not put it all together this year. But you should absolutely be seeing a lot more improvement from this defense than you are. And that's another just disheartening thing. So you don't have anything to build on in Chicago right now. And there's just kind of this aura of being lost of what am I supposed to root for? What am I supposed to think? And it's resulted in some wild pendulum swings by Bears fans. Either they're, the MVP before the season for Justin, 3 games in, Caleb Williams, and then he plays 2 good halves of football against 2 very bad teams and very bad defenses, at least in that game. And then all of a sudden it's back to the MVP conversation. I'm like, it's no way to go through a season. You can't do that. It's not good for your blood pressure. It's not, let me play Dr. Carmen for a hot second and just be like, take a page out of a quarterback book. Don't get too high, don't get too low. But it's a mess in Chicago, and it still is a mess.
If things continue to go as they have, are we looking at a Control-Alt-Delete reset at the end of the season?
I don't think so, because that would buck about 100 years of history with the McCaskies and the owners of the Chicago Bears. They have not shown, first of all, they've never fired a head coach in season. So I think that's completely out of the question of Matt Eberflus getting fired right before the season ends. But even after the season ends, the Bears have not shown that they are willing to pay a general manager or a head coach that is no longer working for them. So they usually let these guys play out their contracts. I don't know if that means maybe a change at offensive coordinator, but I absolutely think that this is Justin Fields' last season in Chicago. I think that the Bears do have one or both of the top picks in the NFL draft come April of 2024. They're taking a quarterback. That's too good of an opportunity to pass up when you're not completely sold on a guy. And I talked about this yesterday with Adam. The fact that Justin is not Ryan Poles' guy matters. It matters because of the fact that you build the way that you build a team as a GM. You have to have everything. You have to build around your quarterback. And if you are not completely sold on that guy, you didn't scout that guy. I don't know what Ryan Poles' grade was on Justin Fields when he was coming out. But if you're not completely sold on that guy, you can't tie your job to someone that you inherited. That's just, it's not something that GMs are willing to do. And I don't blame them for it because their jobs are tied to the success of these quarterbacks. So I think for the first time, they have the opportunity to actually have a GM, a head coach, and a quarterback that were all brought in under the same regime. And that's going to be very interesting to see if they can then build the team in that way, and if it fits with Ryan Poles' personnel philosophy, and if it fits with Matt Eberflus's or whoever the offensive coordinator's system. But I do think this is the last year of Justin Fields in a Chicago Bears jersey.
Can you imagine if the Bears end up with the number one pick from the Panthers, and that you say it's Williams or Drake May? Imagine the pressure, right? Because as you said, right, you got Chicago with the history of the QBs. So you got this whole city looking at you, desperately wanting you to succeed. And then you have an owner in David Tepper, who I'm sure cannot be best pleased if that comes to pass, because that is going to mean that QB will forever be compared to Bryce Young, and it's not what he would have wanted. So an interesting situation to play out there. And maybe that leads us on to talking about QBs, obviously, in Green Bay, because it is a new era, but probably started out really well, but over the past couple of weeks, suffice to say, Matt LaFleur has been tetchy at the podium. Are thinking, that loss to the Raiders, and look, they've had their struggles. They've beaten some bad teams, but we've seen Devonta Adams talking this week. For Green Bay, what is the expectation? Like, going in, I suppose there was the unknown, but there was a lot of hope that the roster was pretty strong and that Jordan Love could really kind of grow and develop. But it's been very up and down. Where do you think they sit after 6 weeks of the season, Carmen?
I don't think that their viewpoint has changed. Progress isn't linear. That's just how it is in this league. You're going to have ups and downs, but they are thinking in the long term. They're thinking in terms of years down the road. This is a system. This is a strategy that they have employed since Vince Lombardi. And it's something that has worked for them since Vince Lombardi, which is why you enter into that organization as an employee, as a front office person, as a coach. And they're like, hey, listen, this worked for Vince. Who are you to say it's not going to work anymore? And we've had a track record, a 30-year track record of it working. And I'm not necessarily saying that Jordan Love is a future Hall of Famer, but until he really proves otherwise, they're going to stick with him. And I think injuries have gotten in the way. I think that game against the Raiders, I was there in Vegas for it. It very much looked like a game plan that was supposed to include Aaron Jones. He was a very last-minute scratch from that game, and they really thought he was going to be able to go. So now you're kind of on your heels trying to figure things out in real time, and that makes a huge difference. So I think at halftime, their leading receivers were all three of the tight ends, and it didn't make a lot of sense. It was very disjointed, but that's kind of what happens, and that's an experience, though, that Jordan Love now has. And as he progresses into the season, I mean, the 6 games is not a big enough, 5 games, because they already have their bye. 5 games is not a big enough sample size to determine if this guy is going to be good long-term. He's still young. He's still getting his first reps as the bona fide starter in Green Bay. And that's going to take some time in a league where we want instant results. That's just not how it works. But at the same time, he was a first-round pick. Brian Gutekunst has done this before. He's seen Ted Thompson do it before. And this organization is not one that's very trigger happy. So they are going to let it play out. And I don't think their viewpoint has changed at all.
He gets the opportunity against my Broncos, who are defensively, let's say, pretty shoddy this year. So let's see if he can get things going. Final question, because I recognize and I value your time, but one of the things I suppose that I'm really interested in is, something that's intrigued you maybe outside of the NFC North. It can be positive, it can be negative, it can be something that surprised you, or something coming into the season that you thought maybe it was a rookie or it was a trade, or something that has really kind of caught your eye in the NFL in 2023.
That's so interesting. That's such a good question. Gosh. Well, we came into this season thinking about like the value of what a running back is. And I have spent a lot of time thinking about what that means for that position, but then also what it means for other positions, in the sense that running backs feel like they're unfairly treated, unfairly paid, all that kind of stuff. But you look at the top paid running backs, and it's a guy like Christian McCaffrey who can catch passes out of the backfield. You have to be versatile. You have to be almost positionless. So the way that you can't necessarily, I don't know, you can't pay a guy a one-trick pony, I think is what I'm trying to get at anymore. That's not something that, especially among skill players, that's not something that teams are willing to do anymore. So this shift into these more positionless players, you think about even in Detroit, Jahmyr Gibbs was supposed to come in. I do believe he's more of a gadget type of guy, but he was touted so highly because of the fact that he can do so many things, like run routes as a receiver, in addition to being a runner. And that goes for so many different positions now. And I think that that's another reason why everyone was so in love with Justin Fields, is that he can factor into the run scheme as a quarterback. And you're seeing more and more quarterbacks become runners, and what that can do to flip defenses, on their heels. So I am very interested in the evolution of how offense is turning to like these kind of positionless players. And it's because of how sophisticated defenses are getting, and what that means for these players' value. So that if you are the best runner in the league, like a Derrick Henry, like a Josh Jacobs, are you really going to get paid at the top level of that when that's all you can do? Even though it's a great thing, but that's just not where the NFL is anymore. So the evolution of all of that is very interesting. And that also brought me to thinking about how tight ends are completely undervalued, because they've been they have to factor into multiple phases of an offense, and they've always had to do that, but they're not paid like it. Like, a lot of them are really good receivers, but then you have to be an extension of the offensive line on top of that. Like, why aren't we paying these guys more than receivers? Especially for the ones that do catch passes and block, those combination tight ends that we're seeing. So yeah, it's that's something that kind of always, I like watching how the game evolves and what that means for different players and the value the teams are placing on these guys.
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting. I think that builds on, and I know you shared this, I saw on Twitter, and I listened to it as well, Kevin Clark and Dominic Foxworth's conversation during the week about the way in which coaches, and it builds on what you're saying about like utilizing players in different positions. So how Kyle Shanahan realized that Debo was going to be good but not great as just a receiver, but when you line them up in different ways, and the same now on the defensive side of the ball. So it's really interesting. Over here, there was this concept in the 1970s, actually it was the Dutch brought in total football, and the idea that you would play all over the field. So it's interesting to kind of see that come into the NFL. For fans on this side of the Atlantic, Carmen, who enjoy your stuff, and I would advocate them checking out more, where can they find more of your stuff?
I share everything that I do on my social media, on Twitter and on Instagram. It's Carmi V. And then all of my articles appear on foxsports.com. And yeah, all of my appearances and stuff end up on social media. So check me out there.
Perfect. Absolutely, do check out Carmen out. Cannot advocate her checking out her stuff enough. Really appreciate you taking the time to chat to me, and hopefully welcome you back in the not too distant future.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for having me. Anytime.